Good morning. I'm back. I am sorry it's been a minute. I was delayed. But I am here to talk with you today, as promised, about Rings of Power, the Amazon TV show. Being an Amazon TV show, my personal expectations were always middling to non-existent. Sure, they've got millions of dollars and all the resources you could ever need at their fingertips. They could have done something spectacular. They still could. But we know that they won't, and we know that it's a little bit naive to kind of expect literally anything else at this point, because we can see it for what it is. They want to make some money off the Tolkien IP, and this is what they've come up with.
When I tell you what I'm about to tell you, you will be told my opinion.
As far as I can tell, the show received a lukewarm reception and also triggered some criticism from the online fandom. Surprise, surprise. And this kind of outraged response, or pre-sponse as I'm calling it, caught my attention, and I watched the show very eager to see what all the fuss was about. The cast announcement caused an uproar, so I was expecting some kind of horrible, abysmal, Hobbit-esque pile of trash, but what I found was a completely acceptable fantasy television show. I was pleasantly surprised. It is very possible to have a good time here, kind of turn your brain off and just have fun. You can completely do that with Rings of Power. And despite my expectations or utter lack thereof, I did like some of it. I like Arondir. He's a good character for an elf, and he's hot. He's so hot. In this fandom, we love a hot elf character. Legolas walked so Arondir can run, and run he does. Very fast, probably. I love when he catches an arrow right out of the air. Fantastic. So cool. Dudes rock confirmed. I love him and Bronwyn. I think they're very cute, Sumi, whatever. They're adorable. And I did enjoy the elf chain gang fight. I had a blast with that. And I would be lying if I said I'm not still thinking about this shot. How fun is that? That's so much fun. Plus, elves running up chains and doing stuff with chains is a thing from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. And everyone loves those. I do also like Galadriel, sometimes. I particularly like the scene on the boat with Isildur where they're chatting with each other. She kind of maintains this tone of authority while meeting him where he's at and managing to have pretty much a human conversation with him. And he clearly respects her. I just think it's a nice moment. It's a cool scene between these two characters. And, I do also like when she gets to wear her armor, because it means she gets to wear eyeshadow, and she's so beautiful. She's so babed up. It's awesome.
Oh, work, you f***ing holy you. She looks beautiful.
I also, surprise, surprise, enjoyed the Harfoots. They're very cute. I thought the hiding in plain sight stuff was delightful and done so well. I don't know, what a nice way to kind of illustrate that concept that hobbits are good at hiding. And I thought the pagan imagery was pretty refreshing too. That was really fun to see, a nice new little twist on how we think about hobbits. I like that Sadok knows about Ents.
Sadok trees don't talk.
Some do.
That's a nice little touch. That's very cute. And I do think Poppy and Nori are adorable. I've heard a lot of people compare them to Frodo and Sam, but to me, they're giving Merry and Pippin energy. And everyone loves Merry and Pippin from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. I also really love the dwarves. I love Disa. What a great character. I'm so glad she's here. She's warm, she's loving, she's shrewd, she's calculating, she's power hungry, she's loyal to her husband almost to a fault, and her voice is incredible too. What a gift. I love Durin the Fourth and his Durin daddy issues, and Peter Mullen's Durin the Third. Come on, how wonderful. What a treat for us to get to see that. That's a dwarf king, my dude. That's a fucking dwarf king. That's what I'm talking about. I liked the horror violence, like, that is something I'm into. I love a Kill Bill, I love a John Wick, I love a Battle Royale. Like, especially in the later episodes, if you're into fun spectacle, there's lots of it here for you. Even the subtler horror elements, like this particular scene between Elendil and the Queen, where they discover that she's lost her eyesight, and she goes, "I see." And Elendil goes,
Do you?
Oh, God! Diabolical.
The Lord of the Rings movies do also showcase a lot of Peter Jackson's horror chops, and everyone loves those movies, so it makes sense to kind of lean into the horror elements in the show. Also, that scene with Elendil and Galadriel on a slow-mo horseback ride on the beach, come on! You're gonna put beautiful flowing garments on a woman, put that woman on a horse, have the horse running in slow motion on a beach? I am there every time. I have a season pass, babe. I'm on board. Let me drive the boat. Like, let's go. I could go on here. Like, there is lots to like. It's an entirely palatable show, but there is also plenty to dislike. And rather than going point by point on stuff that I didn't like we'll get to that in a little bit, it's easier to summarize with my overall impression of the show, which, when I was watching, I kept getting this, like, sense of deja vu almost, like this creeping sense of uncomfortable familiarity of, like, casual and uncritical emulation. As I kept watching the show, it became apparent to me that I wasn't necessarily watching an adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, which, by the way, is what they have the rights to adapt. They have the rights to The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and the appendices of Lord of the Rings, and that's it. I don't know why y'all keep expecting to see content from the Silmarillion in the Rings of Power show. They don't have Silm rights. They never had Silm rights. I think all of us should be happy about that. Anyway, it became apparent to me that I wasn't necessarily watching an adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. I was watching a mimicry of Peter Jackson's portrayal of Middle-earth from his Lord of the Rings movies from the early 2000s. Everybody loves those. The Rings of Power is chock full of uncanny, oddly placed, and meaningless references to the script of the Lord of the Rings movies. Rather than making reference to the many instances of textual references that the movies have, they're just little phrases that pop up here and there, conspicuous wording and phrasing that's directly reminiscent of how The Lord of the Rings, the films, again, not the books, is written.
You've only just arrived!
It is a fool's hope.
Isn't that old enough?
If you've seen the Lord of the Rings movies enough times, which I certainly have, certain things about the way the script was written and the way the lines are delivered, they stick in your brain. And it seems like those are the elements that the Rings of Power writers tended to pull from when they were writing their script for the show, as if to subtly call back to those oh-so-beloved films. But it doesn't work. It don't work here. It is off-putting and discomforting and jarring and unsettling more often than it is endearing, if it ever is, which I would argue it isn't, because they went ahead and decided to put things like follow your nose in here.
The air doesn't smell so foul down here. If you dine in the air, always follow your nose.
There's a sweet smell on the air this way. When in doubt, Eleanor Brandyfoot. Always follow your nose.
What the fuck is going on in here on this day?
Follow your nose? That's not from Tolkien's source text, babe. He never says that. In the book, when the Fellowship is in Moria and Gandalf can't remember which way to go, he takes the Night Watch and makes up his mind, saying, "I do not like the smell of the left-hand way. There is foul air down there, or I am no guide. I shall take the right-hand passage. It is time we began to climb up again." Again, nowhere does he say follow your nose, but that is a clever way of getting that point across, and continuing your characterization of Gandalf as like a kindly, silly, friendly old wizard, self-assured even in situations of uncertainty. So it does work in the movie. And because Gandalf says it in the movie, the stranger also says it in Rings of Power. Now, it would be very cool if the stranger was Alatar or Palando, one of the Blue Wizards, but this direct Peter Jackson Gandalf quote, included in the context it is, they're pretty much telling you it's Gandalf, and they're not even doing it with a line from the source material. They're doing it with a made-up line from the Lord of the Rings movies. And all of this indicates to me that the writers don't care, even a little bit. And why would they? It's only one of the most, if not the most, iconic and beloved fantasy IPs we have. You'll notice that my likes about the show are pretty superficial, and that's because the show is, for the most part, pretty superficial. It's tough to dig very deep here because the writers make it evident that care for the source text was not a guiding light for them, if it was even a consideration. Rather, they seem to be guided by the idea that everyone loves those movies, so if we try to be just like those movies, then people will like the thing that we're making. In the end, they produced a simulacrum, a copy of a copy. And again, I'm not surprised. It's Amazon.
Shopping on Amazon.
But I suppose I am used, and we are all used in this fandom, to this particular intellectual property being treated with a certain amount of care and respect. And I think we feel that way in no small part because of the Peter Jackson movies. Like, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens went to great lengths to include as much of the text as they possibly could in that script. And fans of the book appreciate that effort. Like, they did eat a little bit. They did tear it up a little bit. The movies are pretty good.
We're getting hunty here, because we're about to serve Slay and fierce it up for you.
And it pays off in big ways. Chapter title references like A Shortcut to Mushrooms and entire speeches, poems, stories, and songs being lifted directly from the text. These things build trust. They make us feel like we're in somewhat safe hands with the writers. Because watching an adaptation of a text as beloved as The Lord of the Rings can be nerve-wracking for fans. The people who care about it really care. So it's doubly upsetting when the text is mishandled. Sincerity can be scary, so watching and loving a screen adaptation of a text that's important to you is a big relief. And even though we know we're never going to get a flawless text-to-screen adaptation of The Lord of the Rings, which, by the way, does anyone actually even want that? Because I don't think I do. But that sense of being in safe hands with the scriptwriters, it's comforting. And including these little tidbits like chapter titles in the script, direct quotes from the text, little nods to the source material, they make the other necessary evils of adaptation go down much more easily. Because Peter Jackson's movies are not even close to the text. If you really look at them, they deviate wildly and almost constantly from the source material. Like, characters disappear entirely, others are invented whole cloth, action scenes are inserted for no reason other than so as not to lose the audience's attention. Timeline fuckery abounds, and some characters are changed so much from their textual counterparts that two canons have developed. We have Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the book, and we have Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, the movies. And the latter are better known in the mainstream, because, as I've said before, of course they are. They condense this extremely long book into 3 very watchable, if also quite long, movies. And they make Middle-earth and the general kind of there and back again story accessible to a wider audience. Like, all the main ideas of the text are there in the movie. But the movies are not a close adaptation of that text. Nowhere near. But, again, that feeling of safety and comfort is a lasting one. Those movies are really good, and it's because the respect for the source text, even if superficial at times, is in there. It is in there. But I do think the fandom's appreciation for that respect has morphed into a kind of misplaced sense of authority, in that Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies have kind of become the mainstream standard for how to adapt Middle-earth. And as a result, some folks in the fandom have convinced themselves that the Middle-earth of the Lord of the Rings movies is canon. Like, that's what Middle-earth is. It's the one that's in the movies. Like, the movies seem to have a chokehold on these folks' aesthetic understanding of Middle-earth. Deviation is absolutely unacceptable, and even in its emulation of the Lord of the Rings movies, Rings of Power managed to piss off some fans. Like, these fans are insisting that Rings of Power takes them out of the fantasy, and it's not really Middle-earth, and it's an insult to Tolkien. And as far as I can tell, they feel that way because Rings of Power has people of color in it, and according to the fandom, because Peter Jackson's movies feature only white people, Middle-earth therefore contains only white people. They'll say Peter Jackson's movies are more respectful of Tolkien's vision. Even though those movies utterly body most of the source material, they only have white people in them, so they're a-okay with the fandom. And this is, of course, racism. Old school, country fresh racism, and it's nothing new in this fandom, unfortunately. It is very easy to invoke this man's legacy to get the fandom frothing at the mouth. Like, this is a fandom full of old white dudes and insufferable pedants. And I'm sure there's a Venn diagram in there somewhere, but the bottom line is that it's really easy to get us worked up if you want to. So using respect the lore and respect for Tolkien as Trojan horses for your bigotry is an obvious, if extremely shitty, move. These people never seem to talk about the Hobbit movies either. Like, those hideous mistakes are glossed right over. Nothing to see here. Even though Peter Jackson is complicit in, if not directly responsible for, the release of those uncalled for piles of trash. Because again, the Hobbit movies have only white people in them. So even though they barely contain the titular Hobbit and spend basically an entire film on a battle that takes up not even 1/3 of one chapter of the book, they apparently get a pass? This is an ongoing theme in a fandom where people love to insist that Tolkien was writing a mythology for England, so Middle-earth is fantasy by and for white people only, thank you very much. The Tolkien fandom does have a racist tendency, and Peter Jackson's movies unfortunately bolstered this racist tendency with a mainstream presentation of Middle-earth that only includes white people. Such depictions and adaptations empower and embolden open and overt racism in fandoms like this one. Like, I noticed this one guy, Gary Nerdrotic, who is pretty open with his prejudice. He has what I'm gonna charitably call a tongue-in-cheek mode to his content, where he doesn't think he's saying the quiet part out loud, or if he knows he's saying the quiet part out loud, he doesn't care. And I don't care enough to think too hard about it, because this fucking guy doesn't care enough to think very hard about his content. He's irresponsibly ignorant and platforms other loud dinguses. Pillar of Garbage did a good video about Nerdrotic's whole deal, I'll link it in the description here, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this guy because he's not worth it, but I am including him here because he's a good example of like an ongoing fandom tendency. So after stumbling across some of Gary Nerdrotic's tweets, I surfed on over to his YouTube channel and was able to stomach about 3 of his videos. And if you think I'm engaging in bad faith, I would encourage you to go and try to watch some of Gary's videos.
His hair, whack. His gear, whack. His jewelry, whack. His foot is whack. The way that he talks, whack. The way that he doesn't even like to smile, whack. Me, I'm tight as fuck.
But in said videos, I watched Gary air his frustrations with the Rings of Power TV show and sat through his review streams and summary videos about the first few episodes. And I'm gonna dunk on him for a second, and I'm gonna do it without talking about how he pretty much exclusively refers to Galadriel as Guy Ladriel and Arondir as Don Lemonless or Guess Who's Coming to Elevensies, because that's the easy, obvious, I should not have to explain to you why that's fucking stupid type of stuff. I'm more interested in the fact that Gary doesn't appear to know what Harfoots are, or that they are, in fact, canon.
Harfoots, which are actually hobbits, but Amazon can't use that term, so we're just going to call them Harfoots. Then we get to our little Harfoots, who aren't hobbits. And yeah, like it's frolicky Harfoot, not hobbit stuff, and they're just a lot dirtier. And they hide. So there's a scene where a couple of hunters walk by and they're like all hiding in the bushes and they got, Hobbits in the trees, man. No.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
All right, let's get into it. Harfoots are one of the 3 types of hobbit. There are 3 types of hobbits. You got your Harfoots, you got your Fallowhides, and you got your Stores. Harfoots are the most characteristic and representative variety of hobbit. They're the most numerous. I'm pretty sure that's why they went with Harfoots for the TV show. Fallowhides are more adventurous. They hang out with elves. They tend to be clan leaders. Like, there's fewer of them, but they're bolder, so they end up in leadership positions. And Stores are water hobbits. It's likely that Smeagol, before he became Gollum, was a Stoor. Harfoots, and all hobbits, are not magic. Hobbits don't have magic. But the closest thing they have to magic is the ability to avoid the sight and sense of the big people, or men. They're good at hiding. Like, it's an ancestral trait that they've developed into a professional skill, and they wear earthy colors and they blend in well with their surroundings. We even see this in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies, so I have no idea why Gary is acting like he doesn't know about it. But I know all of this about hobbits because it's in the book. And I read the book, like, it's in there. If you want to know about it, you can read about it. It's in the book. Like, I made literally none of this up. It's all in the book that you can read. Gary also doesn't appear to know about the blue wizards, and I can't really blame him for this one. Not a lot of people do know about the blue wizards, but if you have read the book thoroughly, even one time, you know that there are wizards other than Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast in Middle-earth.
The wizard is Gandalf. There's no way it can't be Gandalf. That's Gandalf. It's Gandalf. It's Gandalf. So we're just going to call him Gandalf, not Gandalf.
He's so insistent that the stranger is Gandalf from episode 1. And honestly, like, he is probably right, but his early and complete failure to entertain for even 1 second that the stranger is anyone besides Gandalf, that doesn't suggest stubbornness or conviction to me so much as ignorance and a lack of imagination. He simply doesn't know enough to present an alternative. Any wizened old magic user must be Gandalf. End of. Finally, Gary seems really annoyed about how people say Eregion and Galadriel in the show.
Here's another Tolkien Easter egg, Eregion, or as they would say in this show, Eregion.
I mispronounce stuff in Middle-earth all the time. I pronounced things one way in my head when I read it for the first time, and that's what stuck. Like, Tolkien put the pronunciation guide at the back of the book, so blame him. And yes, Tolkien did put a pronunciation guide in the book. And if you check said pronunciation guide, you can see that in Westron, which is the language everyone in the book is speaking, R is trilled in all positions. You roll your R's in Middle-earth. It's right there in the book that you can read. I know these are like simple little things, they seem very small, they seem very insignificant, but they're details. They're specific, particular details, and Gary's ignorance of the details about a text and a man who was so utterly and thoroughly detail-oriented that he put a pronunciation guide in the back of his fantasy book. Like, when Gary makes it so abundantly clear that he hasn't read the book and doesn't actually care about the text or about Tolkien or his legacy or any of it, I have a hard time engaging with the content, because it's very obvious that he's doing the Trojan horse thing. He's using Tolkien's legacy and a superficial understanding of his work as a cover for his own casual bigotry. And there are loads of folks like this in the fandom. They latched right on to Rings of Power. In some parts of the online fandom, they're dominating the conversation, talking about how Galadriel is a Mary Sue, and how she can't possibly be a complicated and flawed and strong character, because those traits are the provenance of men, and Galadriel is a woman, you see. Never mind that she's literally described as the greatest of all elven women and the noblest of the Eldarin race. Like, you got elves, and then you got Galadriel. Like, she's up here. She's the best.
I mean, she is the moment. She is an icon. Come on now. Yeah.
And also never mind that the character of Galadriel existed before the concept of what a Mary Sue is. Like, The character named Mary Sue and the concept of a Mary Sue was popularized through Star Trek fanfic in the 70s. She's not a Mary Sue. But because this version of Galadriel from Rings of Power is capable and does stuff, the fans don't like it. They much prefer the kind of beautiful maiden version of Galadriel we get in Peter Jackson's movies. The one for whom Celeborn speaks when she first appears on screen.
The enemy knows you have entered here.
It's frustrating, honestly. It's so disappointing to see this thing we love, this text and the guy who gave it to us, used like this. And I do mean used. And by the way, I'm not trying to deny who Tolkien was. Like, that man had some very interesting things to say about women in his lifetime, but he was not a bigot. And to see his legacy disrespected in this way by the very people who claim to care for it when they invoke it, it's becoming increasingly hard to watch. Like, so much of the backlash to Rings of Power started before the episodes even started dropping. The cast was announced and people lost their shit. There was so much uproar about basic inclusivity, so much negativity about a new adaptation of the world we claim to love. And rather than taking a step back, chilling the fuck out, and watching in good faith, like using the show, imperfect as it is, as an entry point and a vehicle to revisit Middle-earth, the fandom seems absolutely determined to have a bad time. I'm not saying you have to love Rings of Power or even that it's any good. Like, I maintain that it's fine. I just don't know what y'all were expecting.
Why are y'all acting brand new?
And I don't know why you insist on continuing to drag Tolkien through the dirt by invoking him in your shitty reaction content. One look at Gary's thumbnails reveals that he's not here for the discourse or to talk Tolkien or any of it. He's just here for the engagement, the clicks and attention, so he can make some money. I'm tired. I'm so tired. In preparation for this video, because I do try to make sure that what I'm saying is as accurate as it can be, I've been rereading the book a lot lately. And like, you know, I'll start by checking a fact or a quote, and then I will just keep reading. Like, even in the appendices, I will just keep on cranking. And I think I've accidentally reread like a third of the whole text at this point, because I just love it. Like, when I have it in my hands and I'm reading it, I don't want to put it down. And the book is always going to be there. Like, it's not going anywhere. The debut and existence of adaptations of this text will not ever destroy the original thing. And that fact alone is more than enough to let me sit back, relax, enjoy, and yeah, sometimes roll my eyes really hard at Rings of Power. Like, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Game of Thrones happened, and we lived through it, and that book series isn't even finished. Like, I would argue that one hurts worse. But that's not what we're here for. This isn't Westerosi waste. This is Tolkien trash. And we're talking about fantasy. We're talking about escapism. Like, if you're interested in the spirit of the thing, it's that. That's it. And if you didn't like it, you don't have to watch it again. You can read the book. So that's what I have to say about the show and the fandom's reaction to it. It's a frustrating and disappointing, but not surprising, volume of racist and misogynist reactionary backlash to a show that dares to feature a white woman in a leading role and also features people of color. Like, if the fandom was less focused on physical appearance and skin color, I would have more patience for this level of discourse. Because the show is fine, but a large part of the fandom never gave it a chance. And I can't stress enough, I'm not looking to defend the show. Like, I'm lukewarm to neutral on the thing. But seeing how the fandom reacted to it, and what seeing an elf or a dwarf of color brought out in you people,
Happy birthday, Spray. I'm disappointed in you.
I feel a sort of passive truce with the show and an uneasy stalemate with the online fandom. Like, I'll probably watch more Rings of Power. I don't pay for Amazon Prime, so that helps a lot. And I'm the friend you call when you want to watch Lord of the Rings movies, so I'm the friend who inevitably has to have an opinion about Rings of Power. And my opinion is that it's fine. But the fandom isn't. There is one thing, though, that is stuck in my craw, and I haven't been able to get it out. And it's the name Eleanor Kellemark Brandyfoot.
Eleanor Kellemark Brandyfoot.
This fucking name, y'all. This fucking name for the main character halfling. I cannot believe the unmitigated gall, audacity, nerve, and gumption of these fucking writers to personally piss me off like this. Like, this name is, to me, the most egregious thing about Rings of Power. It annoys the ever-living shit out of me. It's the strongest piece of evidence that I have that the writers do not give a shit and are in fact actively hostile to the text Tolkien wrote and that they have the rights to adapt. Like, if you have your own little thorn in your side, let me know in the comments, because this shit feeds me. And I'm a patient person. I can abide much. But I cannot abide Eleanor Kellemark Brandyfoot. Fuck. All right. First name Eleanor, nickname Nori. Let's get this out of the way. Nori is a dwarf name, and we know that because it's in The Hobbit. I guess they thought that because they have the rights to adapt The Hobbit that they should use them somewhere. But Nori's a dwarf name, and it's so silly to use that name as a Hobbit nickname. A, because it's one of the canonical dwarves that follows Thorin and accompanies Bilbo on his adventure, and B, because her name should never have been Eleanor anyway. Alright? Eleanor is like a small yellow flower that grows in Lothlorien. Eleanor is an Elvish word meaning sun star in Sindarin. And Eleanor is also the name of Samwise Gamgee's daughter. When she's born, she's so beautiful, and Sam doesn't know what to name her. Like, Hobbit girls have flower names, but she's more beautiful than any flower in the Shire. So Sam consults with Frodo, and Frodo suggests that he name her Eleanor, after the little yellow flowers they saw in Lothlorien. And Sam thinks this is a splendid idea, and so yellow-haired Eleanor gets her name. Like, this name is special. Tolkien spent a lot of time telling us why it's special, and I'm pretty sure Samwise introduced it to hobbits. It's a nod to the journey, to the things Sam learned along the way, to his love for and enchantment with the elves. Sam uses his name for his daughter well after the War of the Ring, and Rings of Power takes place firmly in the Second Age. And, you know, as far as I know, no hobbits, be they Harfoots or Fallowhides or Stores, set foot in Lothlorien or the land that was to become Lothlorien before the events of the Fellowship of the Ring, which takes place in the Third Age. Even if they had, they wouldn't know to call the little yellow flowers Eleanor, because that's the Elvish name for them. There is just, you know, no reason why a migrant halfling in the Second Age would be named Eleanor. They wouldn't know about the flower, they wouldn't know about the Sindarin word for the flower, and it was thousands of years before Samwise set foot in Lothlorien. Like, aside from the timeline fuckery, I think it's pretty wild of the writers to take this special name that Tolkien spent time explaining to us why it's special, that Sam brought home from his travels, and casually give it to their main character, Hobbit. Like, there are a fuck ton of other names to choose from in the family trees that are included in the appendices that the writers have the rights to adapt. I suppose the writers may have thought that it would be like a nice reference to the source text to name this character Eleanor, but it's not. It's clumsy and it doesn't fit the character. Part of the reason being that Eleanor has golden hair. That's why she's named Eleanor. She has elvish beauty and golden hair. Like, the reference falls completely flat here. It's not so much a wink as it is a blink and a blank stare. And I can do this for a while. It doesn't make me smile and think about the source text. It annoys me because I know it's misplaced. And I know that because Tolkien made a big deal out of Sam naming his daughter Eleanor. Next up, Kalamark. This will be quick because hobbits don't have middle names. They have nicknames, but they don't have middle names. So why does this one have a middle name? And why is it Kalamark? Well, because the actor who portrays Nori Brandyfoot is called Markella. So they took the real life name of the actor, flipped it and reversed it, and made it the middle name of the character they portray. It doesn't add anything to the story or the character, but it does fully bust up the show for people like me and cause me to think about pretty much nothing else for months on end. So thank you for that one. And finally, Brandyfoot. All right. You know that bit from Fellowship of the Ring where Bilbo's doing his birthday speech and he goes, "My dear Bagginses and Boffins, Tukes and Brandybucks, Scrubs, Chubs, Hornblowers, Bracegirdles, and Proudfoots." And that one little guy goes, and everyone laughs. Oh, and you know Meriadoc Brandybuck, member of the Fellowship, later Master of Buckland, archivist and compiler of the herb lore of the Shire? Yeah. Just take Brandy from Brandybuck and Foot from Proudfoot and smash them together. And you've got Brandyfoot, a ready-made hobbit name. Boom, done, check it off, on to the next one. But we know why Meriadoc Brandybuck is called Brandybuck. Because it's also, surprise, surprise, in the book. Before Brandybucks were called Brandybucks, their family name was Oldbuck. In year 1 of the Shire Reckoning, or Third Age 1601, the Fallowhide brothers Marco and Blanco crossed the Brandywine River and established Buckland. In year 740 of the Shire Reckoning, Gorindad Oldbuck began the construction of Brandy Hall and changed the family name from Oldbuck to Brandybuck. Why did he change the family name from Oldbuck to Brandybuck? Because they live near the Brandywine River. Why is the river called Brandywine? Well, Tolkien tells us. The hobbit names of this river were alterations of the Elvish Baranduin, accented on and, derived from Baran, meaning golden brown, and Duin, meaning large river. Of Baranduin, Brandywine seemed a natural corruption in modern times. Actually, the older hobbit name was Brandanin, meaning border water, which would have been more closely rendered by Markborn, but by a jest that had become habitual, referring again to its color, at this time the river was usually called Braldahim, or heady ale. The Branda in Brandanin is the element from which brandy of Brandybuck is derived, and Branda means border. Like, why, pray tell, would migrant hobbits have a word for border? They don't have a homeland yet. They're on the move. They don't stay in one place for too long. Like, I would imagine borders are not a super familiar concept to them at this time, and certainly not familiar enough to make up half of a surname. Halflings in Middle-earth didn't settle in Eriador or the land that would later become the Shire until the Third Age, and Rings of Power, again, is set in the Second Age. Like, I just don't think that the word brandy would be anywhere near halfling nomenclature in this time period. It took a while for the Oldbucks to start calling themselves Brandybucks anyway, and that was after they'd settled right near the river. So again, like, this doesn't come off as a cheeky reference to the source text or like a cute little Easter egg for us to latch onto. It comes off as like a deliberate and vaguely malicious misuse of the text. Tolkien went to great pains to include all of the stuff that I've quoted here, and it's in the bits that the writers are allowed to pull from in their adaptation. Like, why didn't they pay attention? Why isn't anyone paying attention? This text is so rich. There is so much to it. I've read it probably a million pillion times, and I learn something new every time I read it. So this apparent, like, insistence on misreading or misapprehending the text, and on defending it as a cover for your bigoted ideology, Gary, is not only frustrating and disappointing and annoying. It is boring. I'm bored. all of this is so utterly boring. Like, what the characters physically look like doesn't matter. If it did, Tolkien would have told us what they look like, but he didn't tell us because it doesn't matter. And Rings of Power is full of made-up characters anyway. It's not like you have any textual reference for a lot of the characters in the show. It's so superficial. Like, all of it is so superficial. The show and how the creators chose to phone it in, the fandom backlash to the show, it's kiddie pool stuff. And I'm here to dive into the deep end. I want to swim around. I want to dig in. I want to engage with this thing and talk about why I care about it. A mediocre television show produced by a giant corporation is not going to make or break my interest in the thing. And if you're giving it the power to ruin the Lord of the Rings for you, I'm sorry. That sucks. And I'm sad for you. Maybe next time don't touch the cursed blade that ends up being the key to the instant Mordor Rube Goldberg machine. Because if you got all caught up in the whirlwind of hate surrounding the release of Rings of Power, and you now think that Lord of the Rings is irrevocably destroyed as a result, I would recommend revisiting the book. It's still there, and it's pretty good. Whether you liked Rings of Power or you didn't, whether you found different redeeming or damning qualities about it than I did, that's interesting, and I want to hear about it. I don't, however, have any interest in hearing about it in context of your discomfort with seeing people of color on your TV screen, or with seeing women as fully fledged people. That's racism, babe. That's misogyny, babe. And that's not what I'm here for. Like, engaging with themes of lightness and darkness and how they directly accord to racial coding in Tolkien, that's valid. Shitting your pants because they cast a black guy to play an elf, that's not valid. And if you can't see the difference, I appreciate you watching, but this probably isn't the channel for you. Again, if you're interested in the spirit of the thing, let's try to lead with some positivity, yeah? Like, you know the whole fellowship bound by love thing? Let's try some of that. Because y'all like this book, right? You like it? You enjoy it and you have fun with it and you like the world that it opens up for us? Are we having fun yet? Like, in the interest of having fun, in future videos, I'm hoping to focus more on the book and how the text compares to the mainstream perception of the story and of its characters. I think the fandom's fascinating, but it is so often a battleground rather than a space for shared passion and discourse, and my dears, I am tired. Like, butter scraped over too much bread and all that. So rather than focusing on folks slinging hate and using Tolkien to promote an agenda, rather than spending time talking about a TV show that was, at best, delightfully mediocre, I'm looking forward to delving into this book with you. Let's talk about text, baby. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again soon.